I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 98 of the House and Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee. On Tuesday, November 29th, 2022, the committee is commencing its study of Canada's electricity grid and network. Since today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of all. Before we begin, I would like to remind all members and other meeting participants in the room of the following important preventative measures. To prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback incidents that can cause injuries, all in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from all microphones at all times. As indicated in the communique from the Speaker to all members on Monday, April 29th, the following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidents. All earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in color, whereas the former earpieces were gray. Please only use a black approved earpiece. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of the meeting. When you are not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for the purpose that you will find on the table as indicated. Please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout has been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. These measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. Thank you all for your cooperation. Zoom reminders, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Additionally, screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. I would now like to welcome our witnesses with us today. Witnesses from the Department of the Environment. Mark Kochi, Director General, Energy and Transportation. Karishma Barua, Director from the Department of Natural Resources. Drew Leyburn, Assistant Deputy Minister. Debbie Scharf, Assistant Deputy Minister, Energy Systems Sector. Cynthia Handler, Senior Director, Science and Technology. Michael Ponescu, Director. I will be using these cards. 30-second warning with the yellow. Time is up in red. Speaking to members, we will do 3 full rounds for today's meeting, and we'll start with Ms. Scharf. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to first acknowledge that we gather on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Thank you for inviting us here today to talk about one of Canada's most important national assets. Like the railway or the St. Lawrence Seaway, our electricity sector is a significant Canadian.
Ms. Scharf, can I ask you to hold for 1 second? We have it seems like maybe a potential interpretation, or is it just audio not coming through the earpiece?
I have it set on English just so I can hear it a little bit crisper, and there's nothing.
Okay. If we could, we got thumbs up. So maybe, Ms. Scharf, I'm gonna, is it coming through right now when I'm speaking? Nothing's coming through on the English. Is the translation coming through, Monsieur Samad? So what I'm being told is the English audio is not coming through, but the en français translation is coming through.
Seems to be an issue with my unit.
Okay, there seems to be. Mr. Patzer, is it okay we continue with the opening remarks while?
I switched sides and now it's working.
Okay, great. Thank you. Apologies, Ms. Scharf. Maybe you want to start from the top.
Absolutely. Thank you. So thank you for inviting us here to talk about one of Canada's most important assets. Like the railway or the St. Lawrence Seaway, our electricity sector is a significant Canadian accomplishment. It not only powers our way of life, but connects us as a country and to our friends down south, with enough transmission lines to circle the globe 4 times. Our grid and electricity sector are a competitive advantage for the 21st century, which makes your study timely and important. As other countries now race to decarbonize their grids and dramatically expand the role of electricity in their economies for a net zero future, Canada already boasts one of the cleanest electricity mixes in the world. More than 80% of our electricity comes from clean and non-emitting sources, which puts us among the top in the G20. Hydroelectricity is a central part to our success. It accounts for 61% of the electricity Canada generated in 2022, followed by nuclear and natural gas at roughly 13% each. Wind was next at 6%, and coal still accounted for 4%. Other sources like biomass, petroleum, and solar rounded out the electricity mix. The big story, however, has been the rapid decarbonization of Canada's electricity sector, even as its generation capacity has been growing. Between 2005 and 2021, for example, Canada's emissions from electricity generation was slashed in half, from 125 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent to about 60 megatons. Over the last 4 years alone, annual capital expenditures in the industry have averaged more than $26 billion, and that's each year, from everything from power generation to transmission and distribution investments, as well as new machinery and equipment. And while electricity rates do vary across the country, on average, Canadian industries and households continue to benefit from some of the most affordable electricity rates among advanced economies. That's the good news. The challenge for Canada is that to achieve a net zero emissions economy by 2050, we still need to build out more electricity infrastructure in the next 25 years than was constructed over the country in the last century. And that includes significant investments we need in transmission and distribution upgrades, new interties, as well as energy storage, even greater energy efficiency, and changes on the demand side in areas like transportation and heating. Adding to these challenges are the overlapping roles and responsibilities for electricity in Canada. Provinces and territories are responsible for defining their electricity policy, market, and regulatory structures, including electricity prices, as well as managing their electricity systems. The federal government has regulatory powers over interprovincial and international power lines, nuclear power, electricity exports, as well as a shared jurisdiction over environmental regulations. The federal government also plays an important convening role on many of the issues facing the industry and an important role in innovation. All these moving parts were laid out in the Powering Canada Forward paper released jointly by Ministers Wilkinson and Minister Guilbeault last August. It makes the central point that moving to net zero is not just a challenge, but a tremendous opportunity to strengthen Canada's competitiveness, because jurisdictions with clean grids have an advantage in attracting good projects and foreign direct investment. We've seen that with Canada's electric vehicle manufacturing and supply chains. In the last 4 years, over $30 billion of foreign direct investment has been announced by Volkswagen, Ford, Northvolt, Molicel, Hondas, and others for battery and vehicle plants in Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia. This is why Natural Resources Canada has been part of a whole-of-government approach to Canada's electricity sector. We've been leading on targeted programming and policy, while Environment and Climate Change Canada leads on regulations, and Finance Canada on tax incentives, and the Canada Infrastructure Bank and Canada Growth Fund on financing. The federal commitment is to transition off unabated coal-fired generation by 2030, get on the path to net zero electricity by 2035, and use this as a foundation for a prosperous net zero emissions economy by 2050. But we recognize that this is easier said than done. The pace and scale of action required will be difficult, particularly for those provinces that rely heavily on fossil fuels, which is why the federal government is committed to sharing in the heavy lifting, and why we have found the constructive dialogue discussions we've been having through the regional energy and resource tables have been so valuable. There is significant variation in Canada's electricity sector. We understand this, and we know that federal efforts must be sensitive to this. A key tool for NRCan is the Smart Renewables and Electrification Pathways Program, or SREPS, as it's called, which aims to help accelerate the deployment of renewable power, modernize the grid, and incentivize private sector investment and Indigenous ownership. The program has been oversubscribed since it's been launched in 2021, and Budget 23 provided almost $3 billion to recapitalize it and support critical regional priorities. Examples of successful grid modernization projects include funding for advanced control systems, such as the $25 million for local Alberta distribution company, and $17 million to the Alberta Energy System Operator. We've also recapitalized NRCan's Energy Innovation Program in last year's budget to expand our work on smart grid innovation, which include non-wire alternatives. And we will continue to partner with provinces and territories to maximize the impact of public funding and private investments. As I bring my remarks to a close, I would just like to note a few important milestones that are looming in the months ahead. As NRCan relaunches the SREPS program, other major federal investments related to the sector, such as the proposed clean electricity regulations and the Clean Electricity Investment Tax Credit, will fall into place. And we are looking forward to the final report and recommendations from the Canada Electricity Advisory Council, which was launched last year as an independent body of experts to provide the Government of Canada with advice to help accelerate sustainable, affordable, and reliable electricity systems. You may find that particularly useful to your work here. I know we expect to draw heavily from it to inform the upcoming electricity strategy that was promised in Powering Forward Canada. This concludes my remarks, Mr. Chair. I am happy to take any questions along with my colleagues from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharp, for your opening remarks. We'll now proceed with our first round of questioning. We have from the Conservative Party of Canada, Mr. Patzer. Mr. Patzer, you have 6 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much to the officials for coming. Appreciate your opening remarks. The government did a study previously on clean electricity, and part of that involved a performance standard. Now, in Saskatchewan and in Alberta, we rely quite heavily on natural gas. You know, today, for example, Alberta is running at about 70% on gas. Yesterday in Saskatchewan, we were about 71%, a combination between gas and coal. But part of the issue is these cogeneration facilities for natural gas, they might stop exporting to the grid because of these standards, because of the proposed regulation. So they're quite concerned about that. Just wondering what would happen if these if our provinces quit exporting to the grid? What would that mean for our energy security going forward?
Happy to take that question. So we are aware of obviously the importance of cogeneration electricity in Canada's grid, and in particular in Alberta and Saskatchewan in particular, that have high amounts of cogen supplying electricity to consumers. It is something that certainly we have heard during our consultations on the clean electricity regulations, and we are working with provinces at this time to look at and explore ways to bring more flexibility into the regulation for cogen, in particular, recognizing that in a province, for example, like Alberta, you'd have roughly 40% cogen coming into, as part of its broader generation mix. So that's an important amount of electricity for Albertans. We recognize that. I think it's a lesser amount in Saskatchewan, but nonetheless an important amount. And we are working to provide some additional flexibility in that regard. Minister Guilbeault recently did release an update in February on the clean electricity regulations, where he signaled his intent to explore more flexibility for cogen.
Yeah, has your department been given timelines on how quickly that needs to happen?
Yeah, we've indicated publicly that the final regulation for CER, the Clean Electricity Regulation, will be released by the end of the year.
Okay, by the end of this year. Okay, there's lots of communities, there's lots of business that are looking for more certainty because for example, in Saskatchewan, we still have a few coal-fired plants. They have to be shut down by 2030, yet they've been given absolutely nothing as far as replacement industry for their communities. Now, when the government takes away industry from people through regulation, they need to replace it, and nothing has happened yet. And we're still waiting for these regulations to come out. Is there anybody talking about trying to give an extension to these communities to try to allow them more time to be able to get industry, a replacement industry of some kind in?
So I think you raised coal. In the case of coal, the government of Saskatchewan and the governments of Alberta have committed to phase out coal, to get off of coal. I think the last coal unit in Alberta is going to be shuttered in the coming months. We are on a much faster track in terms of phasing out coal than anyone ever expected would happen, and so. We are obviously working very closely with provinces. There is a national regulation, but we see actually all jurisdictions now in Canada publicly making commitments to phase off of coal, and we don't see major impacts related to that in specific communities. And I think there are only a small number of coal units left in the country.
Yeah, and I mean, those are definitely located in Saskatchewan and in Alberta. Now, it is those coal units that literally saved lives this past winter. And when we look at these regulations that are here, those lives would not have been saved if these regulations come into effect, because the provinces aren't going to export power to the grid that are generated by cogen or even probably by coal as well. There would have been no extra power to ship over to Alberta when they were sending out warnings when it was minus 45. So being that the federal government is the one who regulates interprovincial ties, I would think that that would be very concerning to you guys. Now, part of this, too, is the whole notion around phasing out natural gas, any new natural gas plants by 2035 as well. Has there been any thought or considerations to the safety factor that goes into that, and the fact that the reliability of our grids is so heavily dependent on having base load power? Because when it was minus 45, wind turbines shut down, not because there's no wind, but because it was literally too cold to operate. And that wasn't a one-off thing. It's regularly that cold in the prairies. Yeah. It's not a new thing. So I just... I get quite nervous and worried when I see the path that we're headed on here with these regulations and whatnot. So I'm just, again, at what level is safety a part of the conversation here to make sure that people have safe, reliable, affordable power when it's minus 40 or plus 40?
So I can assure the member that safety is actually a huge part of the conversation, and one that is not lost on us, and it's one that will be addressed and is being addressed in the context of developing the regulation. In particular, you'll note in the proposed draft regulation that was published, there were provisions made for the use of peak power and the use of natural gas to address peak power needs. We are actually going further in Minister Guilbeault's update from February to allow more room for jurisdictions to use gas as a balancing mechanism and during peak power times. And so safety is an important issue in Canada, and I think it's well known to electricity operators and frankly our department as well as NRCan that there will be some need for natural gas in the future. It will be a much less used form of generation moving forward, but nonetheless there will be some gas. Our intent is to help abate that gas.
Thank you, Mr. Kochi. Ms. Jones, you're up next for 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the officials that are here today. Just to follow up on Mr. Patzer's questions, I also understood that just a few days ago, Premier Scott Moe said that that they were going to more than likely use the SMR that was established in Estevan as the two coal generators and the coal mine comes off. Do you want to explain? Because I just picked it up in a clip, so I'm thinking that is what is being done to address the problem that Mr. Patzer has raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, absolutely, nuclear technology is going to be a critical part of the electricity mix going forward, and there's no doubt that every province and territory does need to have access to reliable baseload power. And if you don't have hydro, nuclear offers that alternative for non-emitting, reliable, low-cost baseload. Saskatchewan is incredibly interested in small modular reactors. We did announce federally a $74 million investment in some of the work that they're doing last summer for a grid-scale 300-megawatt small modular reactor in the province that they are trying to move on as quickly as they possibly can. I think that will be the first of several that we will see there. Alberta followed suit not that long ago with Ontario Power Generation and Capital Power announcing a partnership to look at SMRs in the province of Alberta as well, in recognition that because there are not large hydro assets in those two provinces, nuclear is going to have to play a critical part in 2035 forward.
In terms of the blackouts in Alberta, I know Mr. Patzer talked about in the winter at minus 40, but it's my understanding they had blackouts as recently as the last few weeks. Is there another problem with their gas system or something that's been happening there? Do you have knowledge of that, or can you provide us some information?
I think it's now. I think it's publicly known that Alberta's announced some regulatory and market reforms to their energy-only market. They have experienced a significant number of blackouts and I think level 3 NERC alerts. I think they've had like 11 in the last few years, and I think there's an acknowledgement that on the part of the provincial government that some reforms are needed to the energy-only market. So I think that's all I'll say there on that front.
Okay. I want to talk about the regional energy and resource tables for a moment, because I know that the Government of Canada has been working hard at setting those tables with provinces and territories. Can you tell me how many of those have now been established in the country? And also, if any of those are identifying grid interties or interprovincial ties as, one of their priorities, or maybe there's a number of them are seeing that as a priority when it comes to accessing cleaner energy sources.
Thank you for the question. So we do have regional energy and resource tables established in 9 jurisdictions across the country. I will say that electricity has been identified as a critical priority in just about every one of those table discussions. The inflection points, of course, are a little bit different because, as I mentioned earlier, the challenges and opportunities, depending on where you live, are different when it comes to electricity. So in tables like Newfoundland, where they have excess power from their existing hydro facilities, they're trying to electrify more end uses, ports, mines, heating, et cetera. In a province like British Columbia, that's trying to open up new parts of the province to critical minerals and further electrification of LNG. They're looking at transmission assets within the province. But specifically to your question about interties, that is a primary priority in our discussions with both Nova Scotia and New Brunswick for the first phase of what we previously called the Atlantic Loop, which is the reliability intertie between the two provinces that will enable the trade of power and access to broader markets. So that will be critical in particular for Nova Scotia to be able to get off coal by 2030 and figures as a prominent priority in those table discussions.
Okay. Thank you. Based on the assessments by officials or departments, or I'm not really sure if there has been any, but I guess we're studying transmission, but has there been particular areas of the country, you mentioned Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, but areas of the country where it's critical to get to those transmission capacity to build on their systems to allow for more interties, but also to allow for cleaner energy to flow across the country?
I'll just say generally, more interties is good. Because it enhances reliability. Back to the member's comment about Alberta, it was in fact the interties to British Columbia and Saskatchewan that enabled the imports of power to the province so they could balance that grid during those emergency days in the winter. And so it is critically important from a reliability perspective. While provinces absolutely want the economic development in their province for generation, so they tend to bias to local development of generation, I think there's a growing recognition that interties provides that load balancing reliability, allows for greater onboarding of intermittent renewables through its reliability benefits, that we're seeing more and more provinces think about that. There are certainly some challenges around interties with different market structures across the country, who absorbs the risk, who pays. But certainly I think there's a growing recognition of the importance of those interties for reliability and grid balancing.
Thank you.
Done.
That's it. Thank you. We'll now go to Monsieur Simard for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. You know probably that Hydro-Quebec has invested will invest some $100 billion by 2035 in installations and the production of clean energy. Like you, I saw what was in the budget with respect to tax credits, but in looking at that in terms of Hydro-Quebec, the idea of giving the tax credit to the consumer, if I look at it from the perspective of Hydro-Quebec, well, it's just impossible because we have a pool of electricity in Quebec. We have the La Ramenne Dam or from LG1. We have a huge pool of hydroelectricity, and the federal government it would be very hard for the federal government to articulate what it envisages as a tax credit for Quebec, given that fact. So we have our what we call our heritage block of electricity, and even the National Assembly cannot touch that legacy block, if you like, that is our hydroelectricity. It's something that is, in a sense, sacrosanct. So I've had great difficulty seeing how the federal government can attach a price to hydroelectricity in Quebec. Perhaps you know better than I. I have difficulty seeing how they can do it. I suspect it is impossible to do. People from Hydro have Quebec, having worked there on it for more than 20 years, have come to the conclusion that it is well nigh impossible to do. So one of the major players in hydroelectricity, in Hydro-Quebec, that is intending to invest the $100 billion is interested in more information about this tax credit. Do you have some information to give me? Thank you for your question.
Additionality requirements in the investment tax credits, in particular, that the benefit of the investment tax credit flows in terms of benefits to ratepayers. So I unfortunately don't have any deep reflections on that, as it is my colleagues from the Department of Finance that will be outlining how those will be implemented. But I do understand that they will be engaging in further consultations around how to design those conditionality requirements to make them workable. But I do think that the primary objective is to make sure that if there are utilities or private sector companies receiving public funds, that ratepayers are seeing the benefit of that. And I think that's the objective we're trying to achieve. But certainly the implementation is going to be with our Department of Finance officials.
Merci. Merci de votre...
Thank you for your answer. I understand, of course, that it comes under the Department of Finance, but I was hoping that NRCan would have been able to give me more light about the implementation of that. You know, in the specific context of Quebec, we see it as inapplicable from all perspectives. One single tariff for all businesses and for ratepayers. Well, I could speak at length about that, but I'll spare you. In the budget, there would be 10% of the people that would be associated with these projects in the contracts. They would be Red Seal workers. I don't know how Hydro-Quebec, which possesses great expertise already, would be able to embark on that project. 10% of my employees who are apprentices, Red Seal apprentices, part of that program. Well, it seems to me that that would be an intervention in the area of jurisdiction of Quebec. So when we speak about clean electricity tax credits, it could be becoming a barrier in terms of the program.
I don't have a whole lot more insights on that one either, because it is our Department of Finance colleagues. And so I really can't comment on that, but your points are well noted.
Okay. Merci.
Thank you. I very much appreciate your answers. I think it would be quite apropos, given the mandate of the study that we have undertaken, for us to formulate the objectives that are attached to this study. I'd like them to be efficient and effective, and perhaps we could add to the goals that we are seeking to achieve in our study. You might perhaps enlighten me about certain blind spots that exist in the budget because of the Department of Finances. I was hoping that Natural Resources would be able to enlighten me further, but we can do that in our discussion of the study.
Thank you, Monsieur Simard. We'll now go to Mr. Angus for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the officials. When I look at what's happening in the rest of the world and how fast they are moving, and it seems in Canada, I mean, we have regulatory, we have all the various provinces going whatever direction. It's wonder how we're going to keep up. Texas, in a single month, installed more 50% of the solar that Canada has ever brought in. California, with a population as big as ours and a bigger industrial economy, is now able, for good parts of the day, to have 100% renewables. Their battery capacity storage in the United States doubled in 2024. And yet, we're in a situation where, say, for example, provincially in Ontario, the Kathleen Wynne government partially privatized hydro, jacking up our prices. We got stuck with the debt. But then they signed their FIT contracts, where their green economy. It sounded great, but we couldn't get any of the energy onto the grid. The grid couldn't take the capacity, so we had all these. We were paying for solar and wind projects that went nowhere. So, what is the role of the federal government in dealing with provinces that may not want to be part of the solution? And how do you step in and say we need to be looking at this in the light of what's happening globally and the dramatic shift in energy?
Thank you for the question. My general feeling from our conversations with the provinces and territories is there's a general recognition across the board that moving to a clean electricity system is critical. I was just looking at some of the stats, and I think we're over 3/4 of the country is committed to net zero by 2050, including provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta. And there's also a growing recognition that to have a comparative advantage to attract foreign direct investment, you need to have a clean grid. That's how Ontario did it. That's how BC did it. That's how Quebec is doing it. And so I think that those market trends are helping all jurisdictions understand the criticality of a clean grid. Getting there has all sorts of challenges attached to it. At the federal level, we're taking advantage of the strength in our convening power, whether it be through the Regional Energy and Resource Tables or the Clean Electricity Advisory Council, to be able to have those conversations around how we could help provinces and territories get to where they need to go and how to get the best advice we can from the experts to move us in that direction. And at the federal level, what we're also able to do is provide tools and levers that could help motivate markets in the right direction, whether it's the $4.5 billion that have been put into the SREPS program, the $100 million in the Renewed Smart Grids program, the ITCs that help create the investment conditions that motivate investment in the grid. So those are some of the things the federal government is doing. But without a doubt, the provinces do control their electricity systems and make those decisions. So, the convening power in those conversations are absolutely moving in the right direction.
Okay, I guess because not just that we get to net zero, but there was and there is a huge potential economically for us, even for export of power. There was no place on the planet more ready than Alberta. I mean, talk to anybody in clean energy and they said what you could produce out of southern Alberta will dwarf anything Germany could ever do. In 2022, Alberta was responsible for 75% increase in domestic wind and solar power. They had 17% of the province's electricity coming from renewables. And then Danielle Smith brought in the moratorium, which she claimed that the independent electricity grid operator, the Alberta Electric System Operator, had asked her to bring in this pause because they were concerned. And now we see from documents that wasn't true. They were shocked that she made this decision. She lied publicly, and they felt that it would send a closed for business message. I'm concerned about this because that stalled 118 projects, $33 billion in investments that could have been used not just to power the grid in Alberta, but actually set up Alberta as an export economy. And that's not happening now because of this closed for business message. So how do you negotiate a clean energy plan with a premier who makes facts up about chasing business away from what should be the energy superpower of the country? I hope I'm not being political.
Here's what I can say is, in every jurisdiction in this country, including Alberta, and I would argue Saskatchewan as well, there are areas of commonality between the federal and the provincial governments. In the province of Alberta, one area of commonality that's growing quickly is around nuclear. And so the federal government is working with the provinces in those areas of commonality. And, we're watching carefully how the province is adapting its electricity market.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
So you're working on nuclear with Alberta and Saskatchewan. So you're saying the conversation then on the renewable projects aren't going ahead because there's a lot of industry that was ready to move on this.
We have our federal tools that are there and available to projects that are being developed in any province in this country, including Alberta and Saskatchewan. In fact, if you look at some of the stats from the SREPS program, there is quite a number of projects that have been funded in Alberta, and I would expect that that is going to continue. The tools are there, and the private sector can take advantage of those, in particular in Alberta, where that's where many of those decisions are being taken.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. We'll now move to our second round of questioning, which we'll start with Mr. Falk for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, officials, for attending committee here today. Madam Scarf, in your opening comments, you indicated that we have moved rapidly to 80% clean grid. If we apply the 80-20 rule to that, which seems to bear out in a lot of cases, getting to that 80% was a 20% cost. Will this next 20% mean an 80% investment?
So I won't comment directly on the clean electricity regulations and that part of decarbonizing the grid. I'll allow my colleague to do that. But maybe one inflection point or distinction I would like to make. There's two challenges. The first one is to decarbonize the remainder of the grid. But the second challenge, which I would argue is the more expensive one, is growing the grid to 1.5 to 3 times its size over the next 25 years. There's a lot of studies that say it's 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. I think it's in that ballpark. And it's going to be those investments, I think, that will be very significant for the country. So there's a decarbonization challenge. You're right, we've got the 20% left, but there's the growth challenge, which will be significantly larger.
Right. In your opening comments, you also said that a clean grid would attract business. Carolyn Rogers from the Bank of Canada back in March stated that we've had very weak business investment, which doesn't really coincide with having an 80% clean grid. When we look at the Americans, who have a significantly less clean grid than we do, I think they're at 40%, and yet they've seen significant business investment. How do you reconcile that statement?
I think there's a lot of factors that go into private sector actors' decision around where to make their investments. But the one thing that I can say is a clean grid, along with labor supply, supply chain availability, investment climate, that clean grid is a very significant factor. There are many companies that simply don't have the social license to operate unless they're getting their energy from clean sources. I named a few in my opening remarks. There certainly are others, including existing, heavy industry like Algoma Steel and whatnot that are looking to produce green steel and green products. So it is a major factor in those investment decisions that can give you a comparative advantage, but it's certainly not the only factor that any individual company will make around where to site and make that FDI.
Okay, thank you. Back in 2017, this committee did a study on electrical interties, and there were several recommendations that came out of that study. One of them was that the government should encourage electricity providers and intertie operators to work with Indigenous communities and local communities to provide economic value. Can you cite some examples where that has happened?
I can actually cite a really good example with the SREPS program. So the SREPS program has allocated $1.5 billion to date. It has $3 more billion that it will recapitalize. 50% of the projects have Indigenous ownership. Out of that $1.5 billion, that represents $800 million of the $1.5 billion. I think there is a general acceptance, an appetite, and a desire on the part of power producers to see Indigenous ownership in their projects. We're seeing it in nuclear now, whether it be in New Brunswick, at the Bruce site in Ontario. And so I think this is the new norm. And we do have programs that are trying to enable that Indigenous ownership. Of course, we have the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program, which will be another avenue, the Canada Infrastructure Bank that's making loans to Indigenous communities. So now it's about having the instruments in place that enable that Indigenous ownership to happen. But absolutely, it's happening almost across the board.
Thank you. In Manitoba, we recently completed the Kiosk project, which was a partnership of Manitoba Hydro with 4 Indigenous communities. It cost $7.8 billion or $8.7 billion to build to produce 565 megawatts. It was a 7-year build project. With today's regulations in place and Impact Assessment Act, what is the likelihood of a project like that happening in 7 years?
I'm not sure that I can answer that question directly.
I'm wondering if you actually know the answer.
Yeah, except to say that, on the question of getting projects built, I think there is absolutely a recognition that we have to move swiftly to get major infrastructure projects built. They're complicated. I have no doubt that you have seen some of the announcements in Budget 2024 around the Ministerial Working Group and some advancements that are going to be made around permitting, how the federal government works together, Crown coordination, permitting coordination, with the goal of looking to accelerate those decisions.
Okay, so this was.
So, Mr. Falk,
correct. It was 695 megawatts. What?
Time's up. I'll let you on another round. You can ask another question if you get the floor. But thank you for that. We'll now proceed to our next speaker, is Mr. Bruson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Maybe I'll pick up a little bit from where the conversation has been with Indigenous-led and Indigenous-owned projects. And I was looking at SREPs, which I think you were just talking about. When I looked at it, it looked like there had been 49 capacity building projects. 27 of these projects have Indigenous ownership, representing close to $32 million in program contributions. I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about those projects.
Thank you for the question. So those capacity building projects are quite important because it provides an opportunity to give communities the opportunity to overcome some of the barriers that stand in the way of their participation in those deployment projects, whether it be training, in the community, energy planning, feasibility studies. They're smaller scale, but they're the precursor. And what we often find is that after that capacity building, those investments have been made, many of those then turn into deployment projects with the Indigenous ownership in them. So it's a bit of a trajectory of providing that capacity to then enable that ownership.
Great. No, thank you. And in one piece, one of the projects that stands out to me on the energy storage side is the Oneida battery storage facility, which I believe is funded through the Canada Infrastructure Bank, has been doing a lot of important work also in helping to support the work that we're doing on storage and on our clean electricity grid. Can you tell me a little bit more about that project, but also how the Infrastructure Bank helps to support these types of projects?
Absolutely. So it is a 250 megawatt energy storage project. It's actually one of the largest in Ontario, and I think the largest that we have deployed to date, although I expect that we'll probably beat that in the years to come. It is a partnership including the Six Nations and the Grand River Development Corporation, Northland Power, NRStor, and AECON. So it is a partnership between Indigenous communities and other developers. SREPS actually did put in $50 million to that particular project, as well as the Canada Infrastructure Bank. The Canada Infrastructure Bank plays a really important role in offering strategic and low-cost financing. So either in projects that operate with a higher degree of risk, which makes it harder to raise private sector money, or offers more favorable terms to the project to then make them more economic. And so they play a very complementary role. Oftentimes programs like SREPS give grants, but then when you need that higher risk financing, the CIB can come in and complement that, and together it gets the projects over the finish line, and that's exactly what happened with Oneida.
Great, thank you. So we've talked about two programs, and you'd mentioned the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program. Are there other programs that I should know about that specifically are working on building Indigenous ownership and capacity in our electrical grid?
So there's one program that we haven't talked about that I think it's quite important because we're talking about on-grid communities. That's been the conversation to date, but there's actually quite a number of rural and remote communities in this country that don't have access to the grid and are actually quite energy insecure and pay a disproportionate amount for their energy. So we do have programs that target those rural and remote communities, which by and large are Indigenous communities, not exclusively, but by and large are Indigenous communities. We call it the CIRC program. It's a bit of a mouthful, but this is funding that is provided to those communities that are reliant on fossil fuels to help them find renewable alternatives to be able to supply secure, more affordable power to those communities and reliable power to those communities. And it is through a process of self-determination. So those communities have the decision about what avenue they would like to take, and then the CIRC program can come in and help fund those. We have funded 159 renewable energy and capacity building projects to date under that program. It's worth just shy of $500 million, and it's been running for a number of years and will continue to run. I certainly have lots of examples I could share around that.
Actually, I would appreciate if you would be able to submit for the committee the examples, but maybe if you wanted, I only don't have very much time, so if you wanted to just highlight some of them, that would be great.
So I've got one example of 940 kilowatts, the Old Crown Solar Project in the UK, the largest commissioned solar project north of the Arctic Circle. It's displacing 200,000 liters of diesel per year, which is likely being put on a boat and brought in. We have the very small, 2.35 megawatt Fort Chipewyan solar project in Alberta, the largest off-grid solar project in Canada. It will displace 650,000 liters of diesel annually. And the 350 kilowatt Atopic Creek hydropower project in BC. That's going to reduce the diesel consumption in the community by 80%. So there's some fairly significant results.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to our next speaker for 2.5 minutes, Monsieur Simard.
Merci, merci.
Thank you very much. In your opening statement, you talked about small modular reactors. I have a question. As we say, this is the $100 question for you. I'm going to ask it of you because I asked the same question of an energy specialist at home, and I was astonished by the reply. Do you know how many small modular reactors are in operation right now?
But I will start by saying they've been present in nuclear submarines for many decades, and that is probably where their genesis was from. The number I would hazard is 0 or very close to 0 is probably what you're getting
Effectivement. Donc voilà.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. That's what I asked Normand Mousseau, the director of the Trottier Institute. He's the director of physics. I wanted to have some information on SMRs. I asked him how many were in operation right now. He said 0. Now, why am I asking you this? It's because in all the new models of energy, of new technologies that are being put into operation, we need a scientific committee that is independent. And I think that at Natural Resources Canada, that would involve a good number of people. We are looking at a domestic policy that would be difficult to bring into reality. If you talk about the capture of and sequestration of energy, we know that there is often a very high cost, some $2 million or more, and it's very difficult. So do you have any analyses of these new types of energy and their potential?
On SMRs is while their deployments as a small modular reactor are very limited to close to 0 in the world. I would like to draw the example of the BWRX-300, which is the grid-scale reactor that is going to be deployed at Darlington. The X in BWRX represents the 10th generation of that technology. So its application in a small format may be new, but the guts of the technology is one that is well established and well known. So it is new. It is a new format, but it is not necessarily in all cases. Some are new. It is not in all cases necessarily a brand new technology.
Thank you, Ms. Scharf. Time's up. You have another opportunity later. Mr. Angus, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Could you give us an update on the Atlantic Loop? Is it dead?
I will describe it this way. I do not think the Atlantic Loop is dead because the first phase of the Atlantic Loop is a very live discussion between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia for the reliability intertie between the two provinces. There are active commercial discussions that are happening at this time, and I am hopeful as a federal representative that they will conclude those successfully and that intertie is going to be built in the next 5 years.
Thank you. So it's not dead, it's just pining for the fjords. Part of what was supposed to make the whole connection work was going to be, I think, a 50-year loan from the Canada Infrastructure Bank. I think the feds are going to put up about $4.5 billion. What I'm hearing now, now that we get C-49 coming through, is that they're looking to get to meet their net zero by moving to 1,000 megawatts of onshore wind by 2030, which would give them 50% of the province's capacity. So that would be those would be big projects that have to get underway. We know the Americans are easily doing it, but this is Canada. Are the feds talking about loan guarantees to help get these offshore wind projects up and have that as an alternative to the original Atlantic Loop?
Nova Scotia and New Brunswick have clean power plans that they have developed as two independent provinces, which they have shared with the federal government. You may recall on October 16th of last year, Minister Wilkinson, Premier Higgs, and Premier Houston released a joint statement where we did agree to work together on a series of priorities, including the reliability intertie, as well as on their clean power plans. I think what you cited with respect to wind, there's quite a number of wind onshore projects that they're looking to develop, and those are areas that we are in active discussions with the provinces
so you're
on.
saying that that's wind onshore, not wind offshore?
That I would have to check, but that stat may be onshore wind.
Okay. Because the project, the costs of the original one jumped substantially, but there had been the promise of this 50-year loan. I'm just wondering whether or not that could be applied if they want to start moving to other renewable sources to keep to meet their targets and get off coal.
For the types of projects we're talking about with the two provinces, they will have access to the investment tax credits. They will have access to infrastructure bank financing, and then SREPs will be available if there are still gaps that exist. So we believe those suite of tools will be very attractive to help those projects get off the ground.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to our next speaker for 5 minutes. Mr. Falk, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
And just to follow up on my last question there, I just want to correct, I said 565 megawatt, it's 695 megawatt. 2 months ago, I had a discussion with officials at Manitoba Hydro. They told me to do what they did at Kiosk would take 20 years in today's environment with the regulatory conditions that are there. My question is something like that even doable today? And would it take 20 years?
I don't know if I can answer that question. I think it would depend on the nature of the project.
The same project, the Kiosk project.
I can't opine on that question. I'm not a regulator.
Okay. I'd like to hand over the rest of my time to my colleague from Calgary Centre.
Of course. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. And thanks for the interesting testimony today. I do have some questions, but first of all, let's acknowledge that energy consumption in Canada is rising, like it is everywhere in the world. And technology consumption is a large part of that. If we're going to have a technological economy going forward, we're going to have to produce more energy because technology consumes more energy as we continue to deploy more of it. But really, there's three sources of energy in Canada. There's electricity, which is about 40% of the consumption of energy. There's industrial power, which is mostly natural gas, which is about 30% of the energy consumed in Canada. And then there's motive fuels, which is about the other 30%. And I'm challenged to see how we're going to get, in 11 years, to a grid that does away with natural gas and does away with motive fuels, so effectively loads up the 40% of power with an additional 2.5 times or 1.5 times more additional electricity, when we haven't grown electricity barely at all in the last handful of years. Can you please explain how this equation squares at the end of the day?
So I can say that the provinces that manage their markets are actively thinking about how they are going to grow both the generation, transmission, and distribution within their grids. I will reference, although not in detail, studies like the ISO in Ontario, where they did an energy pathways analysis to understand how they would have to grow what sources of electricity and what type of investments they'd need to make in transmission. Quebec, of course, has recently done a study that highlights the figures and the investments required. British Columbia has done one recently as well. So they're very attuned to that. I think if I get the stat right, was it between 1950 and the year 2000, the grid in Canada grew by 3 times over that 50 years. Over the preceding 20 years, there was major investments in decarbonization, and now we're back to expansion. So the utilities and the system operators know how to do this.
So with respect, the grid grew that much, but also did the consumption of every other source of energy grew at the same rate. And now we're talking about displacing those energy sources while the power consumption continues to grow in Canada. So you've got a bit of a riddle here about how you're going to meet that equation of growing energy demand and cutting down on the energy sources, supposedly. Now, I think they're words in the air. I don't think they actually land for people that are actually looking at putting this equation together, with all due respect. But this is a lot of money we're talking about. To follow up on what my colleague, Mr. Angus, said, yes, Alberta has about 35% of its capacity supplied by wind and solar. The cost of that to the consumer in Alberta has been a doubling of their electricity rates over the last decade. In addition, it only provides 7% of the energy in Alberta. So we are still, in Alberta, 93% powered by hydrocarbons. Here's a riddle for you. If we're going to have carbon capture, utilization, and storage at a place like the Shepard plant in Calgary, that's going to require 30% of the plant's power in order to put the carbon underground. Therefore, we're going to have to expand that plant by a function of 30%. Can you tell me how that's going to work as far as filling the grid goes?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. Just generally speaking, I mean, I think it's just an extension of what my colleague said. There is going to have to be a rapid increase in the amount of electricity produced. But one element that hasn't come through as clearly that maybe I could just emphasize is that there's a lot more work to be done on energy efficiency and producing the technologies.
Okay, but you say there has to be a lot more energy produced, a lot more electricity produced. Where in the equation that we have on the table in front of us in Canada is that electricity going to come from? I don't see any sites coming up. Site C is already spoken for. Muskrat Falls is an economic boondoggle, was 28.5 cents per kilowatt hour, grossly subsidized by 2 levels of government. Where are we going? Where is this power going to come from?
Mr. McLean, well, I'll have to stop there because your time is up, but you can continue on that line of questioning on the next opportunity you get. I'm going to go over to Mr. Jawari for 5 minutes. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the officials for being here today. I'm sure if you talked about a 1.5 to 3 times growth of the electricity that we need. You talk about the timeline of 25 years. We are nearly 2025. Our target is 2050. And you said, hey, look, we are well on our path of decarbonization. There's still some challenges, but we'll see a light at the end. However, when it comes to the growth challenges and the capacity building, I like to get an understanding of, as a federal government, do we have a roadmap that says 25-year roadmap, threefold growth? It's going to come from these sources of energy by jurisdiction. Because I think I commend the government for rolling out a lot of programs, which to me is a lot project-based. But I think the the fundamental investment that's needed, the foreign investment that's needed, really are secured when we have a solid roadmap that we could clearly demonstrate that regardless of, you know, this new program that's rolled out, whether it's over 2 years or over 3 years, Canada is on a solid roadmap of doubling or tripling its energy sources from a generation to transmission to distribution, and it's really focusing on building that infrastructure, whether it's on the storage, whether it's on the distribution. Do we have something like that?
So at the federal level, there has been modeling done, for example, with the Canada Energy Regulator Energy Futures Report, which was released in 2023. There'll be another one coming next year, which provided insights into how much an electricity system may grow by 2050, given the decarbonization of the economy and what some of those sources might be. Ultimately, though, it is the decision of the provinces to decide what generation they are going to build, what the inflection points will be. And you know, as a federal official, I would be very happy if every province was engaged in that type of energy planning and the development of those types of energy roadmaps. We've seen them starting to emerge, and I'm going to refer back to the provinces of Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, who have now done that. To the previous member's comment, for example, in the province of Ontario, they've noted the need for 18,000 megawatts of new nuclear required by 2050, and then turned around very shortly afterwards and announced 4,800 new megawatts at the Bruce Power site, which was in direct reflection of the fact that they understood they were going to need that power. But you need to do the roadmaps, you need to do the planning, and the provinces are starting to move in that direction. But we'd be very happy at the federal level to see each and every one of them do that.
Yeah, you talked about the federal government convening power. Is there anything in plan for us to be able to play that role and sit down and say, hey, look, as a country, we got to come together, whether building that infrastructure and also breaking some of the barriers, you know, intra and inter-province barriers, and really have that roadmap? Because I strongly believe that for us to be able to get where we need, and also account for some extra that we're going to need as a result of other technological advancement that we need, we really need to be able to have that roadmap. I think you wanted to make a comment on that? No, that's fine. I just saw you leaning forward, I assume. So what really, when are we going to use that convening power to be able to do this?
So I would like to refer once again that we do have our Clean Electricity Advisory Council that's just about to finish its year of work and produce a report with quite a number of recommendations that I think is going to help catalyze that conversation even further. So once again, I'm going to say I think that work will be very useful for this committee's study, and that work is going to be completed likely in the next month.
I got about 45 seconds. I personally welcome that report. Can you give me an order of magnitude, the amount of dollar investment that's needed to be able to get our capacity built? Just high level. We talk about 2 to 3 times. We talk about 25-year. Give me a dollar value.
Thanks for the question. There are a number of recent studies putting that number in the range from $1 to $2 trillion by 2050, split between generation, transmission, and distribution assets.
Sorry, can you say how much was it?
1 to 2 trillion.
1 to 2 trillion.
Trillion.
Okay.
Trillion. Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll now move to Mr. McLean for 5 minutes.
Thank you again. Following up on my last question, 2.5 times electricity in Canada within 11 years. Can anybody tell me where that's going to come from?
Sorry, I'll just jump in just quickly. I think you said within 11 years. I think it's more like a 2050 horizon, that statistic. At least that's what I think the Canada Energy Regulator is looking at, more about a long-term kind of 2 to 3 times demand requirement, and that accords, of course, with population growth, economic growth, and increased consumer demand, as you rightly pointed out, as the member rightly pointed out.
Okay, thank you. I mean, so are there any sites being developed now to produce electricity at a large scale?
I think there are several sites under development across jurisdictions.
Tell me one, please.
I think Bruce Nuclear is one of North America's, if not the world's biggest nuclear facility. I think Ontario government has announced plans to increase its capacity.
Interesting, because I spoke with Todd Smith, the Minister of Energy, and he talked about how they're going to have more gas turbine electricity in the midterm because their nuclear is going to take a long time to build. So you've got Darlington, you've got Pickering, and you've got Bruce. The only one of those that is an expansion is Bruce. The others are replacing, to not the same degree of energy produced before, previous electricity generation. So let's call it level as far as the nuclear power that's going to contribute to the grid in Ontario. Tell me how we're going to produce more electricity power in Canada.
Sure. I think the short answer to that question is it's going to have to come from a variety of sources.
Okay.
And
thank
I'm going to say,
you.
if I could just add,
all I need to say is somebody give me a large project that's going to take 15 years to build, counting the planning, and yet we're nowhere near even having one on the blueprints right now. So let me move on, if I can, please. We talk about the building out of the intertie here between provinces. The intertie build is going up significantly. The interties in the U.S. take 8 years to plan and 3 years to build on average, 11 years just for the interties, and costs about 1.6 billion per 1,000 megawatts, if you will. So we're going to have to spend a lot of money here on any interties. Tell me about the line losses that happen over 1,000 kilometers of electricity distribution, pardon me. Okay, thank you. Anybody?
Yes, 4 to 5%.
4 to 5%.
Length of the line.
Over 1,000 kilometers or over?
I won't be able to say if 1,000.
My understanding is it's progressive. It's more, the more distance you travel, the more electricity you use. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct.
Okay, thank you. So 1,000 kilometers. I know from Edmonton to Calgary, it's almost 8%. So tell me how much it's going to be over 1,000 kilometers.
I believe 8 is really the very high end of transmission line losses. It's more like 4 to 5%.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You mentioned something, this whole report you referred to, Powering Canada Forward, that clean energy is a competitive advantage. I think affordable energy is a competitive advantage. Clean energy is a nice to have. We look at these things, I think even the Canadian Electricity Association looks at this as a triangle of affordability, reliability, and cleanliness. Call it sustainability. But the most important one of those three angles is, of course, the sustainability. If you don't have a reliable electricity power grid, you don't have anything. So affordability and sustainability are going to have to be your pivot points. Can you tell me how we're going to continue to have a reliable grid if we have continued increasing demand without any plans, or few plans, if you will, for more supply?
I mean, I'm just going to state the obvious. Provincial system operators are actively planning for this. They run the grids in provinces.
Thank you.
And they are actively planning.
I agree. So why is the federal government stepping on their toes with an overreach like the Canadian Energy Regulations? And I suggest that you advise your minister this is a gross overstep that's going to cause great problems for the delivery of power to Canadians that need reliable delivery of electricity to their homes going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McLean, with 8 seconds to spare. Thank you. We're now going to go to Mr. Schiffke for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir. You're on mute.
That's fine.
Hold on.
Can you hear me now, Mr.
Yes,
Chair?
yes, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you for your patience. I want to thank the witnesses for being here for this very important study. I'd like to begin my line of questioning for you, Ms. Scharf from Environment and Climate Change Canada. How does the clean energy grid fit within Canada's climate plan? More specifically, how much of the reductions that we need to achieve to do right by future generations comes from our transition to clean electricity in Canada?
Sorry. I'm from Natural Resources Canada, so I was conferring with my colleague
apologies. I
from.
guess it
That's
could be
not a
anybody
problem
from
at all.
Environment and Climate Change.
Maybe there's two aspects to how the electricity grid is going to contribute to achieving climate objectives. The first one is going to be through the decarbonization of the sector itself, to which we are, very far down that path. And the second is going to be as an enabling energy source to decarbonize other sectors of the economy, whether it be fuel switching to electric vehicles or to other electric heating sources, or whether it's to power industries, whether even oil and gas, steel, et cetera, and to decarbonize those industries. So there's two aspects to how it helps with the climate plan.
So
Maybe
we
if I could
have
just-
to meet.
Sorry,
Yes, please go ahead.
If I could just add, there is no path to net zero emissions by 2050 without a clean grid. It is going to be the primary alternative to a fossil fuel based economy, and electrification is a crucial part of the climate
Thank you.
plan and foundational.
You just answered my second question, and I appreciate that very much. The next question I have, can you share with the committee how the government or what economic opportunities come with a net zero electricity grid? And the flip side to that, if you could also share, what are the consequences if we don't move to a net zero electricity grid? We know that, for example, the European Union has put a price on pollution and they've stated that they will no longer trade at a certain point with countries that don't have a price on pollution. What are the consequences to us not moving to a net zero grid, and what are the advantages?
I'll answer that. So, all G7 countries now have committed to net zero electricity as part of their broader net zero plans. It's pretty clear what's happening in the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act and the recent U.S. clean power regulations released by the U.S. administration. We've seen an explosion of renewable electricity globally by 50% alone last year, according to the International Energy Agency. Canada needs to be part of that. If it wants to remain competitive, and clean power certainly positions us well in the North American economy and the global economy.
Thank you for that. One small anecdote, being a member of parliament from Quebec, I see firsthand how many industries are actually setting up in Quebec because Quebec is able to offer that low carbon electricity, including producing the cleanest aluminum that exists in the world. Some of the battery manufacturers are setting up in Quebec because the electricity used to create those batteries are going to be some of the cleanest in the world. So if we can do this across the country, those economic benefits will be felt by all Canadians. The next question I have in the remaining time that I have is, what, based on the investments we've made by NRCan and the investments that we've made by Environment and Climate Change Canada, where, based on your experience over the last couple of years, are we getting the best bang for our buck? If we can include something in this report that we'll be providing to the minister, where are we getting the best return on our investment with regards to seeing that transition to a clean energy grid?
Maybe I'll just start the response by saying the cheapest electron is the one you don't need to use. And so in terms of return on investment, energy efficiency measures are the cheapest way, typically, of getting clean electricity in that sense. But then after that, I think it really varies by setting. The technology that might be the cheapest or the best investment in Nova Scotia is going to be different than perhaps one in British Columbia. I don't know if you want to add anything, Debbie.
Maybe the only other thing that I will add is, the governments do play a role in helping to de-risk technologies, helping to advance their deployment at their early stages so that they can get commercialized as quickly as possible and prices can come down. And I think that over time we've seen a number of NRCan programs. If we go back to the day when we did programming around wind before it was ubiquitous, it was actually quite expensive, and helping to motivate those investments and bring those prices down. And so that's another area where there's been bang for your buck.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Schiffke. We'll now go to our next speaker, Monsieur Simard, for 2.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you so much. I'll come back to what I was saying earlier, so you won't be surprised. It follows on what you have just said. Could you give the committee information about the independent scientific committees that advise NRCan on various sources of energy. Is there an independent entity that supplies you with information about the production of electricity, with strategies dealing with carbon capture and sequestration? Does that exist?
Sure. I mean, I can start with the scientific side. So obviously, Natural Resources Canada is a science-based department. About a third of our employees are scientists, engineers, or technicians. And while they are federal public servants reporting through the normal channels, they provide us with very important independent advice. Engineers, obviously, professionally are required to give that advice.
Comme mon temps.
I apologize. I have very little time. But if it's possible, can you give us a flow chart? I'd like to see it on a chart, how that works when you receive advice from an independent committee and how that moves along towards the ultimate goal, the technological goal. I would refer you to a meeting that I had with the minister. I had a meeting with Siemens. The hydrogen is a part of I was told rather that hydrogen with carbon capture and sequestration would not work because it would be far too expensive. You would have to reduce the price by assuming a portion of it, but the risk was much too high according to them. So they have expertise. They have expertise about the technological perspective of using hydrogen. And if there is a private business that this would be headed for failure, that you couldn't use hydrogen, why is there so much public money moving in that direction? So just give me a very short answer. How does NRCan analyze this type of project, and who are the people with technological advice, and how do they give it to you? If you could possibly put that in writing, give it to the committee, I'd be very grateful.
Answer, please.
We can certainly provide more detail on where that expertise comes. But again, I'll just briefly say, NRCan is primarily made up of scientists, engineers, technologists who provide us with ongoing advice about the latest innovations that are happening in Canada and around the world.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Angus for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank the witnesses. This is you know your files. It's well. This is impressive. I want to help my good friend Mr. McLean because I'm so glad he's back. He was asking where these projects are. Well, Vineyard One-Off in the United States will power 400,000 homes, and the projects are happening. Another one, 250,000 homes. The one on Rhode Island, 100,000 homes. And yet, we're seeing in Canada, in Alberta, our good friend Daniel Smith chased out billions in investment. Calgary Economic Development said there was 170,000 jobs in clean tech that could happen in Alberta, and that got chased out. And he mentioned reliability. The problem is that, it wasn't renewables that caused the blackouts in the winter. It was the lack of investments in the natural gas power plants by privatized operators. And they're still, God, what province has blackouts in April? I thought they were an energy superpower. And so then I was looking at what was the Alberta advantage. Do you know what the price per kilowatt hour is in Manitoba? 10 cents. New Brunswick, 13.9 cents. Ontario, 14 cents. And we mad as hell at paying our hydro bills at 14 cents. Alberta, 25.8 cents per kilowatt hour. That's what privatized operators, they can't even run the power. It's the third highest. The only place higher is Nunavut and Northwest Territories. So you're paying through the nose for power in Alberta. But I just have to end with, what is Quebec? 7.8 cents a kilowatt hour. That's what happens when you have a plan. So I just want to end on a simple question. Do you believe if we invest in renewable energy that we will have long-term power based on what you're seeing in the rest of the world?
So renewables can play a very significant role in an electricity system. It's attractive because it is low cost, and there's been record global investment in renewables. And there are many jurisdictions globally that operate with a very significant share of variable renewables in their system, but it needs to be a well-crafted system, and that system is going to have to operate with a number of other features to it for the system to work. And that is going to include things like storage, optimized interconnections, demand-side response, smart grids, and a market structure that brings that all together. And so I think it's not a simple one thing. It takes a well-crafted market structure. And I think that Alberta is actually making changes to its system that is going to bring that well-crafted structure to fruition in the months and years ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. We will now go to Mr. Patzer for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Patzer.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Let's just not forget that it wasn't that long ago that Ontario had to subsidize people's bills because of the. Yeah, they still are now. So there we go. Don't need to say any more than that. I want to just focus on with the clean energy regulations coming in, and I guess this whole notion of requiring that all power be generated from non-emitting resources by 2035. How much is that going to cost to achieve that? What's the cost on that?
So we're in the process, as you know, of updating the draft regulations. They will be published later this year, and we do intend to publish a final cost benefit analysis. Our draft regulation amount was a $70 billion cost over between now and 2050, and with an overall net benefit of close to $30 billion. So the benefits were greater than the costs over that period.
So you said $7 billion?
70 billion.
70. Okay. All right. Well, the federal government's own modeling shows more than $400 billion is needed to actually replace aging facilities and to expand generation capacity in Canada's electrical grid. So how much of that will have to be subsidized?
Yeah, so those are two separate numbers. So the $400 billion number is the estimated system cost as a whole. The $70 billion is the amount, the increment of the CER, the Clean Electricity Regulation. So they're two separate numbers.
Okay, so that $70 billion, that's all public money then?
Not necessarily. It depends on the jurisdiction, depends on like some jurisdictions are privately run electricity systems like Alberta. We have a mixed system in Ontario, so it depends on the jurisdiction.
Right, but so since we're talking about, you said that the federal government has jurisdiction on things like nuclear, on interprovincial ties and things like that, right? So given that the whole point, I think, part of what the CERs is going to be based off of two of those things. So how much is the federal government going to be subsidizing in order to hit those targets, right? And I mean, whether it's the $70 billion or the $400 billion, right? Now, there'll be some private money in there, I'm sure, but how much is that going to cost the taxpayer on government regulations to do this, to electrify our country by 2035?
So, I mean, the federal government obviously is contributing through the ITCs that have been raised and other programs. I think, budget 2023 alone, we saw a commitment of $40 billion over the next decade to help facilitate the provincial transition. And I mean that's an important amount of money, but that federal government is a partner in this, and there are other contributors to that. Obviously, provincial ratepayers, foreign investors, and so on and so forth.
Okay, the next point I would like you guys to talk about here, and I'm hoping that there's been some research done into this. When there's been multi-million-dollar investments by the federal government into solar farms across the country. How much in insurance is there on those farms? Has the government insured those investments?
In principle, no. So the government supports capital investments in those projects under, we'll call them contracts, but the risk of those projects, the ownership of those projects, the implementation of those projects are all within the purview of the project developer. And so the federal government would not be insuring them. We're not the owners of them. We are simply contributing to making them economically and financially viable.
Okay, so if, let's say somebody builds a wind farm, government pours whatever, a solar farm, pours in $25 million into it. Year 3, it gets hailed out, completely destroyed, written off, then what?
I would presume the project developer would do what it needs to do to manage its own projects. So the federal government is not an owner in those projects.
Right, but if what happens if the proponent walks away from it, then the taxpayers spent $20 million on one little project, and there's no cleanup, and then it's just kind of left a big, vast area of panels just sitting there. I've heard reports of solar panels just being chucked in the landfill after they've been hailed out before. So I just, for spending huge amounts of public dollars to achieve a regulation, I'm just concerned that this is something that could happen here. One area where Sask Power, for example, has...
Mr. Patzer, our time is up.
Okay.
I gave you a few extra seconds there.
That's okay.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Eldag for our last 5 minutes. Mr. Eldag, go ahead.
Great, thank you, and thank you for being here and for the insights you've shared so far. I'm a member of Parliament from British Columbia, and we've recently gone through the commissioning of Site C Dam, and we've seen how expensive it is to build those kind of scale of projects. I have a lot of conversations in BC about the potential for geothermal. And I'd like if you could share some thoughts on what you see as, either in British Columbia and perhaps beyond on geothermal, what the cost comparisons would be and reliability. So a bit of information on geothermal and what role that might play within Canada's energy mix. If we have anything on geothermal, happy to to hear on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question. Geothermal is a very interesting renewable energy source. It has a very high capacity factor, like nuclear energy, 95%. Because we don't yet have a geothermal plant in operation in Canada, the cost may be a bit higher than other renewable energy technologies, but that cost would be offset over the life of the plant because of the very high capacity factor. We have a number of plants under construction in Saskatchewan and Alberta. And BC is also known for having very good geothermal resources, both high and low temperature. Thank you.
Okay, so some possibilities there with geothermal, and I hear projects that are underway and more opportunities to come. Okay, perfect. We also had talked earlier in our discussion about large-scale projects, and we really, I don't think, fully explored the offshore potential. At this committee, we've spent a lot of time on C49, and really looking for your thoughts on, we talked about how the Atlantic loop will benefit, but can you perhaps speak a bit more on the unrealized potential that we have for offshore energy production and what that may mean to the providing the power that we need as a nation?
I don't have any direct figures around megawatts of offshore potential. My colleagues might know, but I will say there is a great amount of potential in the offshore. And one of the interesting, unique features of offshore wind is that the wind blows more in the winter and in the cold, which is not what you expect from the onshore wind farms. So they actually have some unique considerations around offshore wind that could provide that kind of balancing with what's happening onshore with renewables in the wintertime. But there's just tremendous amount of potential in the offshore, in the Atlantic region, which is why, of course, you had the bill in front of you not that long ago. And we're doing quite a number of other pieces of work to try and accelerate that development. The provinces are very keen on it. Nova Scotia has already sort of set a target I think it's by 2025 for a call for bids and wanting to advance that. The legislation is only one piece, though, of the framework that needs to be put together. We have 2 regional assessments underway so that we can get a clear picture of where the impacts might be, where are the best places that are suited for these wind farms. So when these projects do come to fruition, we can move much faster through the regulatory process to get these projects built. We have $50 million that we're spending on studies to collect baseline data that we're going to need to feed into those projects assessments, to look at wind integration studies into grids that are going to be onshore, to talk about how those projects will integrate with existing systems. So all of those are happening in the corollary around the legislative pieces that are moving forward, so we can get those wind resources built as quickly as we can.
Okay. Well, and just lastly, I was going to say, what's happening on the international front, and how is Canada poised to take advantage, perhaps, on what's going on internationally that would be applicable here as we try to meet these upscaling the amount of energy that we have in over the next number of years that we have?
I'd maybe just say Canada is a very active participant in all the major multilateral fora that talk about energy. The International Energy Agency is obviously preeminent amongst those, but we also have IRENA, which is exclusively focused on renewable energy. And Canada, I would say, punches well above its weight in a lot of these organizations. That's on the energy RD&D and the energy policy side. And I think even on the energy regulation side, Environment Canada is quite active internationally as well.
Are we out? Okay, well, my colleague wanted to know if there's any opportunity for geothermal from abandoned oil wells.
There are a few projects actively, or a few companies actively active in this space. Everloop, the Ever project takes advantage of oil and gas assets, and there's another one. Do you want to jump in on the other one that's using oil and gas? I've actually forgotten the name, but we could certainly say the name. There's a second project that at least that is using abandoned oil sites or oil infrastructure to do geothermal.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's the end of our rounds of questioning for today. Thank you for your testimony.
Georges, peut-être.
Georges, just a second, and perhaps to facilitate the life of our analyst, we certainly in our notebooks we have references to tax advantages that are given to this type of project. I don't know, I didn't really see that in the budget, so perhaps the department could give us the different R&D programs that are financially supported and that would allow for clean energy to be developed, and also to develop funding. Perhaps that would help our analyst, and that will make life easier for future witnesses.
Thank you. I see heads nodding from officials, so if you could provide that to the clerk and the analyst to help include that information. Thank you, Mr. Simard. Thank you, colleagues, for your hard work today. Thank you for providing your time and your testimony to this important study. We look forward to having you again. That concludes our meeting. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn? It is. Have a great constituency week. We'll see you in about a week and a half. Take care. Meeting adjourned.